Hello. Today we're going to talk to the Turkish scholar and activist Sungur Savran, who is in Istanbul, to discuss what is going on in Turkey. We had scheduled this interview even before the recent events which have taken place in Istanbul, which bring to the fore the totally destabilized condition in which Turkey is and the crisis that is now confronting its government. A NATO-backed Islamist government led by Erdogan, which has been in power now for several years and has faced one crisis after the other. Sungur, thank you very much for joining us. Could you start by describing what happened? You were close to the events when the bombs went off. Could you just give us a description of how that felt?
Well, this was the beginning of a very big demonstration. Probably hundreds of thousands of people had come in from all over Turkey, including the Kurdish geography of Turkey, to demonstrate for peace. And we were in front of the historic train station of Ankara on a square, which is quite big, a lot of people, quite a thronging crowd. And all of a sudden, we heard right next to us this very powerful explosion sound, and of course moved away from that spot. But while we were moving away, I turned my head and saw in the air, as many people did, this is my own experience, but many people had the same experience, metal pieces, cloth pieces, and pieces of flesh. This is what we saw, and then of course we slowly by slowly, in very controlled manner, moved away from the square, but there were many people who were left on the square together with the bodies of the dead and the wounded. And as our audience probably knows, there were more than 100 casualties, dead, and close to 400 wounded.
This is a tragedy on a very large scale, Sungur, because you knew many of the people there, activists from different parts of the country. So whoever carried out this act, it was very clearly an act of provocation to both try and intimidate and attack the demonstrators, but also, I would have thought, to destabilize the government, if indeed the government was not part and parcel of this. So what is the feeling in Turkey at the moment? Who was behind this attack?
The thing is, there are of course different takes on this, but I would say that first of all, the idea that this is ISIS is the government's idea, and we do not believe this until such time as the whole evidence is laid out. But they have now imposed a secrecy on the investigation so that, it is very difficult to get the evidence. Secondly, they are now saying ISIS, but preparing public opinion to believe a different kind of scenario where two organizations, they say, this is in the newspapers of all the pro-government newspapers, two organizations were involved, and the suggestion is it's the PKK in collusion with ISIS. The funniest, the most ridiculous theory that one can imagine in the concrete context of the Middle East, because, as you know, the PYD, which is an historic ally of the PKK, is at war with ISIS. It's the real force that fights ISIS on the ground, as even the Americans would confess. So the whole theory is a farce. We are expecting this to come through so that, they want to make believe before the elections that it's the PKK, and so people who voted for the HDP, which is, of course, the party that represents the Kurds, as well as many socialists, etc., will lose a lot of votes.
But Sungur, they must really believe that people in Turkey and people all over the world are stupid. Because if they didn't believe that, they couldn't come up with an argument of this sort, which is incredible. It's a fairy tale, and no one is going to believe it. Let's discuss the related issues now. Clearly, Erdogan was shaken by the fact that he didn't get a ruling majority in parliament. He was the largest party, but he didn't get the majority. And shaken by the fact that the HDP, a coalition of Kurdish organizations and non-Kurdish secular leftist organizations, got into parliament, breaching one of the most difficult thresholds in electoral law, certainly in this part of the world, and how to deal with it. For me, this appears like a maneuver carried out by the secret state or whoever to try and intimidate and frighten people away from the HDP and to make the government appear as the stabilizing force in the country. So who profits from this?
I totally agree. Let's come to the reality. I mean, I think, just to finish off, they are now putting through newspapers this kind of scenario, which probably they will not own up officially, not to make themselves laughing stock for the whole world. So they are putting this through their very controlled press to reach the people at large, to make them believe that the PKK was involved. But probably they won't make it official. Now, let's leave all that behind and talk about the reality. The government, I think, is either directly involved in permitting ISIS to carry out this murderous act, or at least indirectly responsible for having permitted ISIS to do all its mischief since before the elections. Before the elections, which this is the 7th of June for our audience, before the elections, as you say, the HDP was running for more than 10%, which is the highest threshold, electoral threshold on the face of the earth, and they were attacked by a series of bombings. First, their buildings in Adana and Mersin, two important towns in the southeast of Turkey, but the last one was in Diyarbakir, just 2 days before the election, a very similar incident to the one in Ankara, where 2 bombs went off, but only 4 people were killed, and everyone said, we were very lucky. This time, having had more than 100 dead, we prove to be right, of course. So, in those cases, the government didn't really inquire at all. Now, before and after that, there was, of course, the 20th of July when in Suruç, in a town in Turkish Kurdistan, very near Kobani, this city under siege for a long time by ISIS, which was then defeated when the armed forces of Rojava, the Kurdish autonomous region there, pushed back ISIS. In this town of Suruç inside Turkey, there was a bombing which killed 34 Turkish militants who were solidarizing with Kobani, and that incident too was not inquired into at all, which means the government is responsible for not going after ISIS with all its crimes, if these were crimes of ISIS and not the deep state directly. So, whoever the direct perpetrators are, the government is responsible for this. The whole world should know this. Erdogan himself is, in particular, representing, together with his small inner cabinet of the interior minister, of the justice minister, and also of the head of the intelligence agency, they are responsible for everything that happens in Turkey. Erdogan is now someone who is fighting for his survival, because it's either staying in power as the president of the republic or going to jail for a long term for all the crimes he has committed, both corruption, for which evidence is ample, and also for all these killings of demonstrators and Kurds, etc., in different stages of his reign, of his rule. So this is a man who is fighting for his survival. That is the domestic part. He is trying to destabilize the country, show the HDP as supporters of terrorism in quotes, and therefore trying to bring down the vote of the HDP under the very high threshold of 10%. They received 13% on the 7th of June and probably will receive as much, if not higher, during this November 1st elections. The international part, may I go into that?
Of course.
Yes, okay. The international part of this is this. Erdogan is also the person who has tried to destabilize Syria most seriously, because Turkey, most effectively, let me put it this way, because Turkey has a common border with Syria of 900 kilometers, around 600 miles, and therefore has all the possibilities of harboring ISIS and al-Nusra and the militants of al-Nusra and ISIS and all the other takfiri and sectarian Sunni organizations. It can also, Turkey has also served as the point of transit for international fighters, militants, combatants for ISIS. It has been the point of transit for Saudi and Qatari money. It has also been the outlet for the sale of Islamic State oil, which brings in a lot of money for the Islamic State, etc., etc. So Turkey has helped ISIS all this time. And I think they are still in collusion underhandedly, although at a certain level it seems Turkey has joined the US coalition in bombing ISIS. But that is only one level. I think at another level they are still hand in glove working together. So that is the international.
Let me just stop you. But
Yes,
Turkey is also a central plank of NATO. It covers the eastern flank of NATO. So do you mean to suggest that all this has been going on, the backing of ISIS and the most sectarian jihadi groups, without the knowledge of the United States?
No, that is not the case. You see, at the beginning, I think before the formation of ISIS as a breakaway group from Al-Qaeda, that is to say, al-Nusra was the front of the Syrian section, so to speak, of Al-Qaeda. Before that, I think it was both the West and Turkey in collusion with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. These are the forces really that support the jihadi forces in Syria, that supported these forces together. With the breakaway of ISIS from Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra, that front, that Syrian section, it was really only the Sunni powers of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, that continued to support these forces, as well as the other forces. But the United States became more and more aware of the fact that Turkey was still supporting these forces, and the European Union as well. And that formed, in fact, a point of tension between, on the one hand, the Western powers, the imperialist powers, and the triad in the Middle East, that is to say Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. Turkey and Saudi Arabia, mind you, have their own bone of contention concerning Egypt, because in the case of Egypt, Saudi Arabia is for al-Sisi and Turkey is for the Muslim Brotherhood, but never mind, let's leave that aside. In Syria, they work together. So this causes some tension between Turkey and the United States. And the United States is now supporting, of course it is working together with Erdogan, because Erdogan is so powerful for the moment, he's in power, etc., etc. But the United States is now working more and more closely with an opponent of Erdogan inside the AKP, Abdullah Gül, who is the former president of the Republic.
Of Gulen. He's a supporter of Gulen.
Gül, yes.
Gül.
The United States is now supporting more and more Gül, and Gülen, who is, of course, this fraternity, this Islamic fraternity that broke away from Erdogan. And also the CHP, the Republican People's Party, which is the founding party of the Turkish Republic, now pretending to be social democratic, etc. So there is a front formed by the United States itself. They are preparing this new front of what I would call reactionary forces as well, as an alternative, to Erdogan. We are fighting, as well as the HDP, hopefully, for a third front of Kurdish National Liberation Forces, plus, of course, the working class and the laborers of Turkey who are fighting. And Ankara, the Ankara demonstration, was a very clear expression of a kind of alliance between the working class and the Kurdish National Liberation Movement in nascent form. That is, I think, why also it was bombed, and why this whole incident was so grave. This is, Tariq, let me add this and I stop here. This is the most serious attack on working class demonstrations in the history of Turkey, and in the history of Turkey there have been a lot.
Are you suggesting that this attack was even worse than what the military dictatorship did in 1980?
No. What I'm suggesting is this. That was a more,
systematic,
long drawn out and systematic attack. No. What I'm suggesting is this. This is the most serious attack on a demonstration, on a working class demonstration, because this was organized, the whole world should know this, by two union confederations, aided by two professional left-wing organizations of doctors on the one hand and engineers and architects on the other. So it was a working class labor movement that organized the whole thing, and this was the biggest attack on a labor movement in action in Turkish history.
Let us just discuss dispassionately the state of the opposition in Turkey. First, the traditional mainstream opposition, the followers of Kemal Pasha, the Republicans, their supporters. Let us discuss that first. I've heard that there have been attacks on the Alevi districts in part of Turkey by the secret state, ISIS, who knows, and that quite a lot of Republican members of parliament come from that area.
Well, the Alevis, who are the minority religious denomination in Turkey as opposed to the Sunnis, have been under constant threat throughout centuries of repression by the Sunni majority. And therefore, they have taken the part of the Republican People's Party that you have.
For a secular Turkey.
Yes, exactly. And therefore, the Republican People's Party is very much under the influence of this community, as well as, of course, other forces. The attacks have not started, but there is a threat. This government is trying to foment a kind of civil war between the Sunnis on the one hand and the Shiites and their allies, the Alevis, on the other hand, all over the Middle East, so as to raise Erdogan to the position of the old Ottoman sultans ruling over the whole Middle East. This is a real project that is developed by this government. They now call Erdogan, when it's time for this kind of project, the Rais, which was the title of Nasser in the 60s, in 50s, 60s, and early 70s. So they are preparing for that kind of. Therefore, the Alevis feel very much under threat. That is what it is. But may I now come? So the Republican People's Party is, as I said before, trying to form a coalition with the more moderate elements within the AKP, starting with Gül, but also playing on Davutoğlu, the current prime minister, who they hope will move away from Erdogan after the elections. And Gülen is the force also behind the scenes, as he has always been. Gülen is the fraternity leader, remember, is the force behind the scenes.
And just to explain to our viewers, Gulen is the cleric who has been based for a long time in the United States and is regarded by many people as being very close to the State Department, to put it at its mildest.
Exactly, exactly. We at our party, the Revolutionary Workers' Party, call this whole coalition the American opposition, because it was, this is not an exaggeration. I'm not someone who has, a tendency for conspiracy theories. The American ambassador in Turkey, the previous one, Ricciardone, had a secret meeting without anyone from the party with Kılıçdaroğlu, the leader of the Republican People's Party. Then he traveled to the United States to meet Gülen's people. Then he came back and started to ally himself with a lot of Islamic figures. So this is a coalition that was concocted. The whole process was conjured, so to speak, out of different elements by the United States in opposition to Erdogan. That's why he keeps saying we are against the United States, they are against us, etc. He doesn't use the word United States, but everyone knows that he says that the United States is against him. So this is one element of opposition. But I think there is a very hopeful alternative opposition. May I explain why I am hopeful?
Before you go on to that, explain to me what is the situation inside the Turkish armed forces, because historically the Turkish army has of course operated to preserve what they call the ideals of Kemal Pasha, but effectively acting as a US instrument inside Turkey, which is a member of NATO. There were lots of reports that one of the plans of Erdogan was to try and neutralize this by pushing through the promotions of lots of Islamist officers inside the army. So the army is a critical player and has been a critical player in Turkish politics. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about what state the army is in.
This is a very good question, of course, because for historical reasons, as you were saying, the army has always been very active in Turkish politics, and everyone in such times of crisis always, asks themselves whether there will be a coup or a military intervention. Now, the situation is this: I do not think that Erdogan can really promote Islamist generals or colonels so as to control the army, because these people were probably pro-Gülen. He was the person who was surreptitiously organizing within the army. Therefore, I do not think he has very many sympathizers of that kind. He has been able to neutralize the army through different means, really, using some secret weapons, because I'm not going to go into details, but there were some, secret meetings between the chief of the general staff and Erdogan at a certain point some 8 years ago, and we have never known what they have discussed, and both have said they're going to take the secret all the way to their graves, etc., etc. So I cannot go into any details because we don't know. The situation nowadays is this: we have a new chief of general staff who is probably a bit different from the previous one, who had totally capitulated to Erdogan. Now, although Erdogan still has some control over the army, I think, the problem is this: the army, as you said, is an army, a very important army for NATO. And it has been controlled by NATO, and it has really kept its allegiance to NATO. And therefore, Turkey can never become a Pakistan. Some people say nowadays Turkey is becoming Pakistan. No, but in Pakistan, the difference is that there are other similarities nowadays, I agree. But in Pakistan, and if I'm wrong, please correct me because this is your original country, in Pakistan, the army also takes an Islamist attitude on many issues. In Turkey, they want to be strictly secular because they are so much tied to imperialism and the West and NATO. And therefore, I would say Turkey is being Syrianized, not Pakistanized. Syrianized in the following sense: Erdogan is now feeding, and this, I'm using this word very carefully, feeding some forces within Turkish society, some, violent forces called the Ottoman Corps, which is close to the AKP, and others which take violent attitudes in imposing their Islamist views. So this is now becoming a kind of country, apart from ISIS. You have all these Turkish militia organizations which are getting prepared to open up a kind of front on the Alevis and the leftists and the Kurds in open battle. So
These are like
that
the death
is
squads.
that is what makes Turkey a kind of into a process of Syrianization rather than Pakistan. But the army is an important factor here. It is an unknown for the moment. It probably will intervene if this kind of thing happens.
Let us now discuss the hopeful side of the opposition.
Yes.
What is it, how strong is it, and what is its likely evolution?
Okay, let me remind our viewers, this is something that is known but forgotten because the international media constantly talks about the negative aspects of Turkish developments recently. Let me remind our viewers that Turkey is a country in ebullition. I mean, it's really boiling in society. 2013, June to September, the Gezi uprising, which the whole world knows and respects rightfully. 2014, for a week between the 6th and 12th of October, there is a Serhildan, which means an intifada in Kurdish, in the Kurdish part of Turkey. All millions of people come out on the streets. Plus, you have, of course, the armed militia of the PKK inside the smallest towns. 2015, in 3 years' time, mind you, 13, 14, and 15. In 2015, May, before the elections of 7th June, tens of thousands of metal workers rise up, first against their yellow mafia union, then against their bosses, and demand a new collective contract, which is totally outside of the legal system in Turkey. So this is a cat strike, kind of, wildcat strike, kind of strike that involves tens of thousands, first in the very industrial city of Bursa, in the Marmara region close to Istanbul, then in Izmir, in Manisa, in Ankara, Izmit, and Istanbul, and elsewhere. So this is a very hopeful situation because the Turkish working class was dormant, apart from a certain action in 2009 and 10 by the previous Turkish tobacco monopoly workers. It was dormant. Now it is waking up. So what one can hope is the following. First of all, the secular forces in the big cities of Turkey, what one would call both the petty bourgeoisie and the upper crust of the waged sections of the population, mostly office workers, they are now aware of what has been done to the Kurds. The 13% does not only come from Kurds. At least 2 or 3% come from those sections of the population that used to vote for the Republican People's Party because they were very secular and against the AKP, but also, mind you, against the Kurds because they thought the unity of the Republic is very important. Now they're siding more and more with the Kurds. That is one element that is coming into the coalition. If the working class is politicized in this action, in this mood for action, then we have a kind of nascent coalition alliance between, on the one hand, the Kurds, and on the other hand, the working class. And within that coalition, one can have this, historically modernist and westernizing Kemalist element within the, as I was saying, the educated population of the big cities. So this is a hope, of course. It is not something that has been accomplished, but I think we should work for that. The HDP has some popularity nowadays in other sectors of the population. So what the HDP does is very important for us.
So, Sungur, thank you very much. We started our interview with a tragedy, and we've ended up with a feeling of hope, which is very rare in your world, in the world we live in today. So thank you so much for appearing on the show, and we will talk again, I hope, and discuss future developments. Thank you.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.